2 is an easy number for us to process. It's one that we understand as on or off, up or down, left or right. We understand that there are distinctions between these things. And when it comes to learning, it's amazing how often systems are built around the idea of 2 or dual systems to allow us to better understand the processes in learning. In this video, we're going to explore a range of key thinkers in this area that are going to help you to better understand the processes that you can take to enhance your learning and get the results that you're after. We're going to wind the clock back to 1890, where William James has just published The Principles of Psychology, where he explores the idea of these two systems of thinking. One that is fast, is intuitive and automatic, another that is slower, and this one is more reasoned and logical. These provide the foundation for where we are heading next. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he proposes the idea of two systems. System 1, fast. This is the automatic, it's intuitive and emotionally based system. Then System 2, this is the slower system. This one is effortful, deliberate, logical, but often rule-based. As a result of these two things, we have different states that we can exist in. Our brains tend to want to default to System 1. It's the easier of the two to work through and to navigate through daily life. However, there are times when we do need to slow down and ensure that we're being thoughtful about the situation that lies ahead of us. Particularly when we're learning, we want to be clear about what it is that we need to know. And that's where a rule-based approach may allow us to go into more detail, even if it does take more effort, to get to where we need to. The reason that this is important is that System 1 is subject to heuristics and bias. That is, it's looking to take shortcuts. And when we take these shortcuts, we may find that there are things that we miss along the way, or there are important details that we needed to actually go to first before we got to our final destination. And that's where the understanding of System 1 and System 2 comes into play. When you are able to slow down, to be more effortful and deliberate in the way that you approach what it is that you're doing, you're going to find the depth of understanding that comes through. Following on from Thinking Fast and Slow, Barbara Oakley proposes that there are in fact two states in which the brain exists in, a focused state and a diffused state. The focused state is where we're using all of our attention to work on a particular problem, ensuring that our attention is where it needs to be. Often this requires, again, a lot of effort to be able to go through, and sometimes we get very stuck in this state that we can't actually escape to see the bigger picture of what it is that we're looking at. The diffused state is slightly different, and it's one where we actually move away from the thinking process altogether. In fact, we're detaching from it. This allows us to consider a wider scope on the situation, and why going for a walk or when you're in the shower the best ideas come to you is because it allows the brain to release itself from the situation. This diffused state is one that's very important. The trouble is, how do you plan to exist in a diffused state? Simply going for a walk might meet the conditions but might not let you reach the conclusion that you need to. Let's say that you are a detective at a crime scene. You are going around and gathering all of the evidence and you've put it all together. You're examining, going through each of the pieces, however it doesn't seem to come together. In the case of the diffused state, you can now move away from it. All of those pieces are in your brain. It's just going to take that time for your brain to make the connections as to what a likely theory of this might look like. The same thing applies to when we're learning something new. It can be difficult, it requires a lot of focus, and often there are times where it's hard, meaning we get frustrated. This is a perfect opportunity to actually have a break. The research supports that when we have a break, our brains continue to work, consolidating the information and working its way through the neural networks. With this then, when we return to it, we're likely to have a better understanding of it and can actually go into more depth with this. So what we're saying is, it's okay to have a break. The next one that we're going to look at is going to be a little bit different. Not so much about thinking, but more about encoding, the way that our brains work to actively put information in, but also to retrieve it. And this is proposed by Allan Paivio, the dual coding system. There are two elements that we can look at, verbal and non-verbal. Verbal includes words, includes the descriptions and the sounds of those words that we associate with it. Non-verbal are the images and the mental representations that we create alongside with this. Essentially, the logogens and the imagens. that help us to be able to form pictures of the world around us. An example of this is if I said the word treble clef. You will hear it first, then you will see it spelt on the screen. Now for some people as well, you will also have an image that pops up with this. With each of these, what we're looking at is the ties between these. We can have a description that accompanies our image, but we can also have a description that accompanies our words. When we tie all of this together, we actually create more retrieval pathways in our brain to be able to access the information in a better manner. What's interesting about this process is if I simply say the word clef, this could actually represent many different things. And so the brain therefore is going to think about all the different possibilities that could exist. From a verbal side, it's going to think about treble clef or bass clef or an alto clef or even a tenor clef. From the non-verbal side, we're going to develop the images that represent each of these. Depending on our knowledge, some of these are going to be more easily accessible. For instance, someone who is a singer will be more familiar with a treble clef. So stating clef means that they're more likely to see the treble clef. Someone who plays a bass instrument is more likely to think about the bass clef. So with each of these, being able to tie the specific words, the sound, and the image creates a deeper understanding of each of these. The next one we're going to look at is a simplification, and I will acknowledge that from the beginning. However, it does continue to provide insights for us and also in considerations of how we can go about learning. What we're going to look at now is Ron Sun's Clarion model, and this is one that looks at explicit processes and implicit processes. Explicit are the things that are very specific in the way that they can be communicated, in the way that they can be taught. Implicit processes are more intuitive. They're the actions that we can take, that we've developed over time and know how to do them to a certain extent without thinking about them. The conscious model and the unconscious model. And that's where the distinction really makes sense. Ron argues that we should be working from an implicit to explicit model of being. To do this though, we need to start at the explicit stage. Imagine learning guitar. You need to be told exactly where your fingers go. You need to know exactly which strings you are trying to strike as you are playing. This is the explicit part that is communicated and explained by a teacher or through a self-learning experience. As we do this more and more, it becomes more implicit. We can do it automatically. We don't need to think about it as much, and we actually find that because it's become implicit, it opens up more possibilities for us to learn new material. This is the explicit moving to the implicit. When we really consider this model, when we're working from a place of explicitness to implicitness, we find that it takes time to be able to develop the skill, and it's important to do so. However, once we reach that place of automaticity in the implicitness of what we can do, then there is a lot that we can gain from it. And that is the argument. The more implicit the knowledge that we hold, the more automatic, the more we can then relate to explicit knowledge and to be able to take this on. What this means for your learning is that as you develop that automaticity through understanding in that implicit nature, you develop it in a way that it's unconscious. That means it doesn't take as much to be able to retrieve it. Those pathways in your brain are set, which means when you encounter new knowledge in that explicit form, you are more readily able to integrate it into what you do, particularly if it is an area of interest to you that you want to see more of. So taking the time to move from that explicit place, the very considered thinking of how to do things, to that more intuitive place is one that's going to have big benefits for you in the future. The final example I'm going to give is one that I've actually spent some time developing, and this is the idea of two modes of learning, essentially approaches to learning. One is acquisition, a focused approach, one where you take the effort. It takes time and a higher cognitive load to be able to work through what you need to work through. The other is consumption. This one doesn't require as much. It is a broader overview, and it's one that allows us to be able to gain an overall picture of something. However, may not leave us with enough information or knowledge to be able to apply this in a way that is useful. My first observations of this came through where students were given a task to watch a video and write notes at specific points about what had been in there. What I found is that there were two main approaches to this. Some students followed that exactly. They went through, they wrote notes, they talked about key moments in the video and were able to reflect and to be able to recall these later on. Other students opted to watch the video in its entirety. and due to the complex nature of the material, had more difficulty in being able to recall specifics about it. Therefore, we had a mode of acquisition and a mode of consumption. Now, in reality, we can't always exist in a mode of acquisition. There is a lot of information that we're exposed to each day, but there are times when we want to really hone in on what it is that we need to know. There are other times where consumption is the appropriate mode, and being able to select between these two allows us to understand what it is that we're about to put ourselves into and what it is that we want to get out. So what is the key takeaway of all of this? Having two states, or the dual systems, in which we can approach learning, consider aspects of learning and consider aspects of thinking, allows us to be more aware and more cognizant of ways in which we can enhance our learning. For example, if there are decisions that need to be made prior to engaging into learning, we can do so. If we're in the process of learning and we're moving from a place of explicit to implicit, we understand the process that we're working on, that automatic nature that we're trying to create in what we're doing. And it might even be that we're thinking about how verbal and non-verbal cues can allow us to understand something in more depth, particularly in being able to retrieve it from our minds. These dual systems are at the heart of learning, and learning is at the core of all you do.